Last year, the town of Cherryvale, Kansas, population about 2,000, was offered a deal that doesn't come along twice. A company wanted to build a data center on the edge of town, and as part of it, by the city's own account, the town would get nearly $6 million, a new swimming pool, rebuilt sewer lines, money the town's own budget would never have found on its own. This year the deal is gone. The company couldn't close the land, residents had turned up to council meetings to say they didn't want it, and one day it simply wasn't happening anymore. There was no announcement. Most people in Cherryvale, if you stopped them on the street, wouldn't be able to tell you the exact day the pool disappeared. Now hold that against the backdrop. In 2025, the technology industry made the largest infrastructure promises in the history of corporate capitalism. Hundreds of billions of dollars, entire AI factories, data centers the size of small cities, announced with a press release and a stock bump. And in 2026, a striking share of those promises are doing exactly what Cherryvale's did: going quiet, delayed, downsized, cancelled, just without the second press release. So here's the question this video answers. If the AI boom is as real as those numbers say, and in a lot of ways it is, then why is the infrastructure underneath it disappearing, one quiet town at a time? And if that pattern sounds familiar, announce it loud, walk it back quiet, hope nobody lines up the paperwork. It should. It's the third time we've filmed this exact move. First they fired everyone for AI, then rehired. Then they stopped hiring the graduates. Now they're pausing the thing the entire bet is built on. Told, this time, through analyst notes, utility filings, and the minutes of small town councils. To understand what's being walked back, you have to understand what was promised, because the scale of it is genuinely hard to hold in your head. An AI data center is not a server closet. The big ones announced in 2025 are measured in gigawatts, the unit you normally use for power plants, not buildings. A single large campus can be designed to draw as much electricity as a mid-sized city, cost tens of billions of dollars, and cover land you'd measure in hundreds of acres. When a technology executive stood on a stage last year and talked about spending $80 billion in a single year on data centers, that was one company for 1 year. And every one of those campuses has to land somewhere real, which is where towns like Cherryvale come in. The deal a data center offers a small community is, on paper, a fairy tale. We will build a multi-hundred-million-dollar facility on your tax rolls. We'll upgrade your infrastructure. We'll write you a check for the swimming pool. In exchange, the town hands over land, a tax break, a guarantee of water, and a promise from the utility to wire up enormous amounts of power. And the town side of that bargain is not a one-year bet. The incentives that lure these projects, the tax breaks especially, routinely run for years, sometimes decades. The water and power guarantees are effectively permanent. A community isn't wagering a single budget cycle on the promise. It's wagering a generation of them. That's why, in 2026 alone, lawmakers in more than 30 states introduced over 300 bills trying to rein in the tax deals and energy commitments these data centers are offered. The incentives are big enough and long enough to fight over. It is the same bargain, structurally, that we've watched twice already on this channel. A company makes a large, exciting promise about the future, jobs, growth, transformation, and books the good headline today. The town, the graduate, the laid-off worker takes the deal on faith. And the small print, the part where the promise depends on things nobody's checked yet, gets read much, much later. For the data center boom, the small print turned out to be brutal. Because a promise made in a press release travels at the speed of software, and the thing it was promising, steel, transformers, water, power lines, moves at the speed of the physical world. Those two speeds were never going to match. And in 2026, the gap between them started showing up as empty fields. You can watch the walkback happen in the numbers, and they are not small. Start with the single clearest example because it has a name attached. In early 2025, analysts at the investment bank TD Cowen reported that Microsoft, one of the 2 or 3 biggest builders of AI infrastructure on Earth, had walked away from leases totaling around 2 gigawatts of data center capacity in the US and Europe. 2 gigawatts. That's not a rounding error. That's a stack of those city-sized campuses quietly abandoned at the negotiating table. TD Cowen's read, in their words, was that the cancellations points to data center oversupply relative to its current demand forecast. Now widen the lens. Reporting through 2026, drawing on industry trackers, has put the share of planned US data center builds that are being delayed or canceled at close to half. Half. The research firm Bernstein, looking globally, estimated that somewhere between 35% and 40% of announced capacity is at genuine risk of slipping or dying, and expected the pace to speed up into 2027, not slow down. And then there's the town-by-town layer, the Cherryvale layer, multiplied. In just the first few months of 2026, more than 75 data center projects, worth over $130 billion, were blocked or delayed across the United States. Local cancellations driven by community pushback quadrupled in a single year. The delays racked up in the first half of 2026 had already passed the total for all of 2025. Here's what unifies all of it, and it's the eerie part. Almost none of this was announced. The layoffs of 2024 came with a memo. This came with silence. A lease that just doesn't get signed, a groundbreaking that keeps slipping, a line item that quietly moves from under construction to under review. If you weren't reading analyst notes and city council minutes, you'd never know the biggest infrastructure promise in corporate history was being edited down in real time. Which naturally makes you think you know the ending. Everyone in the comments section already does. It's the bubble. It's popping. The AI thing was hot air all along. Except that's not what the evidence actually says. And the real reason is more interesting. Here's the turn. If you line up why these projects are actually stalling, the single biggest reason is not that the demand for AI evaporated. It's that the physical world refused to move at the speed of the announcement. Go back to Bernstein's list of what's actually killing projects. It's not customers canceled. It's grid connections. The wait to plug a gigawatt into the electricity network now runs for years in many places. It's transformers and switchgear, the unglamorous steel boxes that step power up and down, which are on backorder worldwide. It's the specialized liquid cooling gear that AI chips need, which nobody was manufacturing at this scale 18 months ago. These are supply chain and physics problems, not belief problems. You cannot press release a transformer into existence. If you're finding this useful, this is the third video in a series tracing exactly this pattern, so subscribe if you want to see how it lands. Then add the town council layer, which is its own kind of physical limit, a political one. 75 plus projects blocked in 3 months didn't stall because the developers lost faith in AI. They stalled because the residents of places like Cherryvale did the math on the water, the power bills, and the noise, and voted no. It wasn't only Cherryvale. In Edgerton, Kansas, community pushback got a proposal rejected outright, and the same scene has repeated in town after town across the country. That's how you get to 75 stalled projects in a single quarter. not one big cancellation, but 100 small refusals. The bottleneck there isn't compute demand, it's consent. So most of what looks like a bubble deflating is really a promise colliding with the real world's delivery schedule. The demand is, for the most part, still there, which is exactly why, when Microsoft dropped those European leases, Google and Meta stepped in and grabbed a chunk of the freed up capacity. And it's why Microsoft, in the same breath as those cancellations, said it was still on track to spend around $80 billion that year. That is not the behavior of a company that thinks the party's over. That's a company rephasing, building slower where the power and parts actually exist, instead of everywhere it planted a flag. But, and this is the part the "it's all fine" crowd skips, there is a real bubble thread running underneath, and honesty means naming it. TD Cowen didn't say Microsoft canceled 2 gigawatts because of transformers. They said oversupply. Some of this capacity was announced not because a customer had signed, but because announcing it moved a share price and kept a company in the AI conversation. The uncomfortable question sitting under the whole boom is whether the revenue AI actually earns can ever service the hundreds of billions being spent to build it. And right now, that revenue is a forecast, not a bank balance. The clearest tell came from Sam Altman himself on a podcast in late 2025. If we weren't continuing to grow our training costs by so much, we would be profitable way, way earlier. Which is a striking thing for the man at the center of the boom to say out loud. The profits sit on the far side of a spending curve that isn't bending yet. So the honest verdict isn't physics, not bubble. It's mostly physics, with a genuine oversupply problem at the edges, and the two are getting tangled together and sold to you as one clean story about collapse. It isn't one. It's messier, and the mess is the point.
Whichever it is, physics or froth, someone is left holding the bill, and it is very rarely the company that made the promise. Start with water, because it's the stakes people feel first. A large data center doesn't sip water, it drinks. The big ones can use up to 5 million gallons a day for cooling, roughly the daily water use of a town of tens of thousands of people. And a majority of that, in the US, comes straight from the same drinking water supply as the houses next door. Across the country, data centers pulled something like 17 billion gallons in a single recent year, and that number is forecast to double or more by the end of the decade. To make that concrete, look at Northern Virginia, the largest concentration of data centers anywhere on the planet, the place the industry calls Data Center Alley. Its facilities alone drank close to 2 billion gallons of water in one recent year, a jump of more than 60% in just 4 years. That's the curve a community signs onto when it guarantees the water. When a town like Cherryvale signs that guarantee and then the project stalls, it has already promised a river that may now go nowhere. Or worse, promised it to a facility that does get built and then competes with its own residents for what comes out of the tap. Then power. And here I have to be careful, because this is where the internet lies to you most. Electricity bills in parts of the country have genuinely jumped. In the Mid-Atlantic region, residential prices in some states rose by 70, 80, over 90% across 5 years. The wholesale capacity auctions that keep the lights on saw prices spike by hundreds of percent, and data center demand is a real, named driver of that. A Harvard electricity law expert put it plainly: those costs get spread to all ratepayers. So far, so damning. But here's the honesty gate, because doom is a sales pitch too. When politicians and viral posts claim data centers personally jacked up your specific bill by some enormous percentage, independent fact-checkers have repeatedly rated those claims misleading, and careful analysts conclude that for the typical household,
data centers are, quote, mostly not the main driver of your bill yet. Both things are true at once. Data centers are pushing real cost into the system that lands on ordinary ratepayers. And the scariest number you saw on your feed was probably wrong. Hold both. The honest worry isn't your July bill, it's the yet. And then the last one, the fear that got the loudest agreement of all when people talked about this online, the bailout. When a half-built, gigawatt-scale campus gets abandoned, the grid already upgraded for it, the tax breaks already granted, the water already committed. Who eats that? The town gave up the incentives up front. The utility spent to wire it. If it's a genuine oversupply casualty rather than a paused one, the losses don't vanish. They settle onto whoever's least able to move, the ratepayer, the local budget, the taxpayer. Nobody's signing a memo about who's on the hook. That's rather the point. So here's the verdict, and like the last two, it's one you can check. The AI build-out is not being canceled. That's the Doomer's headline, and it's wrong. What's being canceled is the timeline. The fantasy version where you announce a gigawatt on Monday and pour concrete on Tuesday. That timeline was never real. It was set by press releases. The actual one is set by interconnection queues, transformer lead times, water tables, and town councils. And those don't care what the share price needs this quarter. What we're watching isn't the boom ending. It's the boom meeting the bill, and the bill being paid in delay. The falsifiable version, so you can hold me to it. Over the next 2 years, the total power actually plugged in and running keeps climbing. The demand was real. But a large share of the specific projects announced in 2025, in the specific towns and on the specific dates promised, never happens as billed. If instead the whole thing craters, if total data center power actually falls and the hyperscalers slash their capex outright, then this was a real bubble after all, and I was too easy on them. Both are checkable. Watch the plugged-in number, not the announcements. And the practical takeaway, because there's a real one here. If a data center is ever offered to your town, and given the numbers it might be, you now know the 3 questions that separate the good deal from the trap. 1. Where does the water come from, and what happens to my supply if it competes with mine? 2. Who pays for the grid upgrade, the company or my bill? And 3, the one Cherryvale's story turns on. What happens if you don't finish? Is there a clawback, or does the town keep the tax break and the hole in the ground? The towns that ask those 3 questions before they sign are the ones that don't end up holding an empty field. Because that's the whole pattern, 3 videos deep now. The promise is loud, and it's booked today. The bill is quiet, and it arrives later. The companies that made the loudest promises about AI are, one by one, discovering what the fine print said. And they're editing the story down without telling anyone. We're just the ones lining up the before and after. When the next gigawatt gets announced with a press release and a stock bump, you'll know which number to actually watch. You saw the whole arc here first.